The modern Vietnam, as we know it today, was created from French colonialism. The French colonization lasted for over 6 decades. Vietnam is a long and narrow country in Southeast Asia on the eastern margin of the Indo-Chinese Peninsula, with an extensive coastline on the South China Sea. It also shares land borders with China to the north and Laos and Cambodia to the west. Vietnam. Today, the name recalls images of tragic loss of American lives and desperate fighting. In the early 1950s, few Americans had ever heard of that country. Vietnam was not even a place one could find in a map. However, one could find a French colony in Southeast Asia. What we call Vietnam today was once owned by France. Life in the villages was usually peaceful and pleasant before the French came. Much of Vietnam was well suited for growing rice, the main diet of Vietnamese, as well as fish. The Chinese conquerors had taught the people the difficult art of planting and harvesting. Before the French came to Indochina, Laos, the Khmer Empire, and Vietnam were independent countries. Vietnam had been ruled by China for hundreds of years. After centuries of resistance, the Vietnamese had finally earned back their country and independence. When the French first became interested in Indochina, French missionaries sought to convert the Vietnamese to Catholicism, the religion of France. They were first welcomed in the 16th century. The French did not set out to conquer Indochina all at once, though. It took about 350 years before they had power in Vietnam. The French gradually expanded their power in Vietnam. The decision to invade was made by Napoleon III in July 1857. It was the result of not only missionary propaganda, but also, after 1850, of the upsurge of French capitalism, which generated the need for overseas markets and the desire for a larger French share of the Asian territories conquered by the West. Genouilly, the naval officer, was ordered to attack the harbor and city of Touraine and to turn it into a French military base. Genouilly arrived at Touraine in August 1858 with 14 vessels and 2,500 men. The French stormed the harbor defenses on September 1st and occupied the town a day later. Vietnamese troops would not fight them in battles, but withdrew into the jungle and set ambushes on French troops. Many French troops suffered crippling wounds from falling into covered pits with sharpened bamboo sticks. Genouilly soon recognized, however, that he could make no further progress around Touraine and decided to attack Saigon, leaving a small troop behind to hold Touraine. He sailed southward in February 1859 and seized Saigon 2 weeks later. This resistance prevented the French from advancing beyond Saigon and took until 1861 to occupy the 3 neighboring provinces. The Vietnamese, unable to beat the French because of their advanced weapons, concluded a peace treaty in June 1862, which gave the conquered territories to France. French soldiers, outfitted in their heavy uniforms, also struggled in the hot sun and monsoon rains. After 6 months of occupation, the French army was losing hundreds of men to ambushes and diseases such as malaria. Napoleon III's glorious expedition was turning into a disaster. 5 years later, more territory was given to France in the south. The entire colony was named Cochin China. It took them 16 more years before they extended their power throughout the whole country of Vietnam. In August 1883, the Vietnamese court signed a treaty turning Vietnam into a French protectorate. A protectorate is when a state or country is protected by a larger and stronger one, in this case, France. They also took control in Laos and Cambodia 10 years later, since they contained profitable possessions, and added those 2 countries in the so-called Indochina Union. While Vietnam was a colony of France, the French did some negative and positive things towards the people and economy of Vietnam. The French increased the taxes to receive a higher revenue. Rice became more expensive and limited since they were exporting a large amount out of the country, and they increased tremendously forced labor. The people grew poorer and poorer, and their culture changed since the French taught the Vietnamese French law, literature, and history. As time went by, the people were heavily influenced by the French and started to lose their identity. Even with all the harsh things the French had done, they did some good things too. Dumer, the current president of that time, established many social and economic policies that helped with the development of Indochina, as the colony became known in the 20th century. The railroads, highways, harbors, bridges, canals, and other public works built by the French were almost all started under Dumer. The French also changed the schools of Vietnam. They replaced the hard-to-learn Chinese characters with a far easier Roman alphabet. And 20% of the male kids went to school where they were trained to pass exams of French universities. The French even started an excellent medical school, introducing the practice of modern medicine.